All right. Good morning, Doug. We are back. There's lots of news from the last week, lots of different things that are happening all at once. It's actually even hard to imagine, actually. But first, we got to talk about the Encyclopedia Britannica, as is becoming our habit.
We do, and I hope I'm not being in any way improper, taking a page out of Jeff Berwick's book with Lucy, but my dog Lovey Dovey, who's a Ukrainian bar girl in her alter ego, just insists on coming up here and visiting, and I hardly want to send her away. Anyway, uh, let's not let her slow us down. What happened today that's of interest historically? One thing is that today in 337, the Roman Emperor Constantine I was baptized. Now, it's not really important when he was born or when he died. He died shortly thereafterwards. But the fact that he was baptized changed the whole course of history because, this strange mystery cult from Palestine had been growing in the Roman Empire before this, and they were troublesome and annoying. But when Constantine adopted Christianity, everybody else tended to adopt Christianity. So nobody knows for sure what the numbers are, but even as far as up to the time that he was baptized, 10, 15% of the Roman Empire were nominal Christians. And after that, the numbers got much bigger very quickly until 50 years later, it became an official and obligatory religion of the empire. So this was a very big deal, Christianity, which, of course, once it became the state religion of Rome, it was not a question of being gentle and quiet and peaceful. It had to be adopted so that the Roman army and the Roman state could pervert Christianity, which is a peaceful religion, very much unlike Mohammedanism. So anyway, that's a big deal. It's a long story. Don't want to get into that whole thing, but worth thinking about. And another interesting thing is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born on this day in 1859, and he's famous for having written the Sherlock Holmes stories. And Sherlock Holmes is, of course, one of the greatest characters of English literature who's been reincarnated many times over the years. But kind of a little known fact about Conan Doyle is that although he was an MD, incidentally, he had a lot of scientific training in his background, which is where he got a lot of Sherlock's methodology. But it turns out that especially in his later years, he became very interested in spiritualism, and it really dominated his whole life, where people were taking advantage of him with actual frauds. Houdini, who he knew, counseled him that this was all bullshit. But Conan Doyle didn't believe it, left his fortune to spiritualists and got into fairies and all this. So who could have guessed that somebody that created and thought like the most rational character in literature, Sherlock Holmes, would get into fairies later on. So kind of an interesting thing, I think. And another little thing about Conan Doyle, he was educated as a Catholic, a Roman Catholic, by Jesuits. And of course, the Jesuits are most intellectual of the orders of the Catholic Church. And I don't know if he remained a Catholic, but Catholicism, at least officially, doesn't go in for all this spirituality and fairies and this type of thing. So I presume he's what they call a fallen away Catholic, but that'd be more
One of the things
investigation.
I love about one of the things I love about this Sherlock Holmes character is that that character gets constantly remade again and again. Like one of this popular show on TV a while ago called House. It's just
Yes.
Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many characters like that. It's just Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. There are lots and lots of variations on the theme. So anyway, who would have guessed when it comes to the creator of it? And what else went on in history today? In 1960, well, there was something else that was in 2011, which is pretty recent. The U.S. had a deadly tornado that struck Joplin, Missouri, and killed 160 people. And in the U.S., when one person dies, it's front page news, major tragedy. But here in the U.S., or there in the U.S., since we're both in Uruguay right now, 160 people got killed. Okay, that's 2011 on this day. But then coincidentally, in 1960, one of the largest earthquakes on record hit Chile, killing about 5,700 people. Well, that's recent times, 1960, and 5,700 people in a relatively developed country. That's a lot of dead people. So as Americans, we don't really think about that when you hear that 2 or 3 people died in a multiple car crash or something like that. It's got to keep things in perspective.
Yeah. Well, and for perspective, though, those are nothing. Were before this just talking about natural disasters and looking back at what were the major disasters in the last 100 years, and it's crazy how badly China has been rocked with these things. Actually, they had the Tangshan earthquake in 1976 that killed 300,000 people, which makes Chile's look like a rounding error.
It's a huge number. And this is, of course, that was still during the times of Mao, when China was still a primitive country. 376,000 more or less people. It's a huge number in historic times.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But that's not even the bad stuff. Apparently, in 1931, they had a series of Yellow River floods in China that are estimated to have killed 4 million people. 4 million.
Where would they put all the bodies, quite frankly? I guess a lot of them would have perhaps flown out to, out to sea. But, and that would have been during the times of the warlords in China. So it would have been a very bad time to be in China generally. I'm not sure if the Japanese had invaded China, compounding things by 1931, but it would have been chaos central in China at that time. Millions of people dying. I mean, due to natural disaster.
Millions.
Yeah. And forget about later on the disease and the starvation and then of course armies roaming across the land, pillaging what's left. It was a tough time to be alive in China.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of times are a tough time to be alive in China, though. Actually, there's not a natural disaster, but the Taiping Rebellion, which is in basically about the time of our Civil War, I think, roughly around that time. And between 20 and 70 million people were killed during that affair.
These numbers are hard to grasp. And this really
They
keeps,
really are.
they really are. But it keeps things in perspective when, we think it's a major tragedy when a few people get killed in a car accident or something. we're talking big time stuff in China, really serious stuff. So
Yeah, it's amazing. So
uh,
yeah, I didn't realize. I was actually like,
thousands,
what
and
are
then
the
you
worst
can move up to
disasters in the?
millions, and then tens of millions of people dying within a short period of time. It kind of turns my thoughts to the Degel report, which the moving finger, having written, moves on. But we might still yet hear more about the Degel report, because these things that it predicted, with half of the population of the developed world dying, they weren't really supposed to start happening until 25 or 26. So a year or so from
That's
now.
right. Yeah, it's hard to believe. Well, I remember when we did actually our the most popular episode we ever did of this podcast was when we talked about the Deal report, and I think it's got a couple million views actually. That one does, which for us is a lot. And I remember even thinking at the time like how crazy it would be if any of that were true. But you can start to see how some of those things could be coming together. That it might, I don't know, might be true.
Well, if we get World War III, uh, anything can happen. Really crazy stuff could happen in this coming war, because it won't be like World War I, which was very bad, but basically limited to the battlefields, the front lines, the trenches, or World War II, which was still basically between soldiers, lots of, except on the Eastern Front, but still, it was a war between armies. But this war coming up is going to affect everybody everywhere, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and the case I think that at least I've made, and I think you've agreed with it at times at least, is that we are actually already in World War III, but it's hard to diagnose this, in the thrust of it. You can't really see it when you're in the beginning stages of it. I mean, certainly we see the stuff happening in Ukraine, we see the stuff that's happening in Gaza, but there's a lot of other things that are happening that I think all fall into the category of unconventional warfare. And these are in general unconventional war, cyber warfare, electronic warfare, sabotage, propaganda, bio warfare, guerrilla warfare, subversion, economic sanctions, lawfare, and proxy warfare. I think is pretty much a good summary of them. And we see some of these things happening right now or have been happening. I mean, you could argue bio warfare we experienced. There's certainly limited cyber warfare stuff we've seen. Electronic warfare, we listened to before this call, Doug, something from a pilot who was describing flying through Israel and landing in Dubai and all of the electronic warfare that his systems were experiencing. I mean, losing all the sensor systems going off. So that's happening. Propaganda is clearly there. Sabotage the Nord Stream pipeline certainly will qualify. Proxy warfare, clearly we see that. Economic sanctions are out of control. I saw there was in Kunstler's latest podcast, he has a guest on called Jeff Rubin, who says, in quote, in economic terms, this is World War III. In 1960, 4% of global GDP was subject to sanctions. Today, it's almost 40%. And at the rate we're going, it'll soon be 50%.
Yeah, it's yeah, the natives are getting restless all over the world, and we've actually been a long time without a major war. Lots of sport wars, but they don't really count. Uh, it seems like momentum's building, like before World War II, where systems were being tested, first in Spain, in the European theater, and then in China, in the Eastern theater. So, yeah, stuff like this. People almost everywhere seem to be scared and unhappy and looking to move, whether you're an African who wants to get to Europe or a European that wants to get to South America. There's a lot of things going on in the world today.
Yeah, and I mean, in the last week, I just put together this list. When I publish this on Substack, I'll put this list that I put together of all the things that have happened in the last week, and it's really pretty shocking. I'll just describe the general categories first. There's, economic terms. There's some things that have happened in that we'll discuss. Alliances, assassinations, coup attempts, and color revolutions. Another category. There's a big effort to prepare the public, I think, in Europe for war. And there's a number of articles around that I have, and then also some
Oh,
real
yes, in
story in the news
particular,
that are happening.
that the Latvian government put out talking about really nitty-gritty stuff about what happens when an invading army comes across your borders and starts doing nasty things.
Yeah, it's I'll publish the translated version of it on our Substack. So go to crisisinvesting.com if you want to get it. And yeah, I mean, it talks about like as a group, what to do, with if you're in the conflict zone, you have to organize locally to figure out how to handle distribution of food and other supplies and hygiene measures, as well as the disposal of dead bodies. I mean, it's got that level of detail, and this is aimed at the public, at the Latvian citizenry.
Which is really, I don't know if we talked about this last week, but in the Wall Street Journal, and I did not pursue this, and I'm sorry I didn't pursue it. I'll have to look it up. There was a real estate deal being advertised in Riga, Latvia. It was a rather spectacular looking building that reminded me of the Renaissance Center in Detroit, and they were peddling apartments in it. And that's kind of odd that there would be an ad soliciting buyers of apartments in a major complex in Riga at the same time as the Latvian government is putting this out about a war. I mean, are these people in communication with each other? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're trying to, spend on the ad budget to get out from under the properties while they can, the developer.
Anyway, it seems to me that it's war hysteria, though, and the Russians are not, I don't think, going to be at fault at this. The Russians have absolutely nothing to gain by invading and reconquering or attacking Finland or Sweden, both of whom have idiotically joined NATO, or the Baltic countries, or Poland or any other country. What is to be gained on Russia's part? Absolutely nothing. I mean, we had this border war in the Ukraine, which should have come and gone, except for the U.S. is facilitating the thing to continue for a long time. I mean, there's something strange going on, and we're not going to know really what the case is, if we ever really know what's happening behind the scenes, except for 10 or 20 years from now when a book is written by somebody that knows. But this is chaos. We're looking at potential chaos building up everywhere.
Yeah. And Russia has taken a much more aggressive stance in some regards, though, recently. And like in the last week, starting yesterday, they're doing they're simulating the launch of tactical nukes, right on the border in Crimea and the other occupied areas, they've taken back in Ukraine. And that's been something that's been completely off the table up until recently. That was never even discussed, but they're doing that now. And they also came out with something the other day that said, I think it was today or yesterday, that said that they passed some law that basically is redrawing the division of land, between them and Finland.
Well, I don't know what's going on, and I don't think anybody really knows what's actually going on. But my read on it is that the Russian government is being provoked. And when you're being actively prodded and actively provoked, you can't just be supine and say, okay, you can just do whatever you want. For every tit, there has to be a tat. And in game theory, that's actually the most intelligent way of countering a prod is a counter prod. So I think that's what's going on. But the Russians have nothing to gain from this. And I see the Mordor in the world is actually Washington, D.C., and these horrible people inside the Beltway.
What do you think the motivation is, though? I mean, doubling down on this, is it that there have to be some people there that aren't stupid, that, that there must be there. I mean, I think a lot of them are, this is the gravy train, the war effort, all of that. And it's good for power and it's good for money for some people. But I mean, there have to be some people that understand that there are real consequences of this. And is it a calculation on their part that they think it's worth it? And what could be worth it? Where are they going with this?
Yeah, that's really the $64 question. I can think of two things offhand. One is that these people basically live within the Washington Beltway. Everybody that they talk to, uh, they're in the same cesspool together. They all think the same way. If they don't think the same way, they're ostracized and kept out of important meetings. So it's like a self-reinforcing mania.
Mhm.
Uh, that's number one. Number two, this is actually happening in other places. It's like that famous instance of in the late 1600s in Salem, Massachusetts, where witch hysteria took over, and everybody took it on. And if they didn't, they were accused of being a witch. It's pretty much the same type of thing. And of course, we've seen this happen on a national scale. You know, perfect big examples. France after the revolution, uh, Russia after the revolution, China during the days of Mao, these mass hysterias. Well, and of course, global warming hysteria, where everybody believes that's a fact and acts like it is. And uh, it's like
COVID
the
hysteria.
COVID hysteria. I mean, none of these make any rational sense at all, but it's like a mind virus that's spread. So this is happening within the ranks of the deep state as well as
Mhm.
among the public itself. Doesn't
Okay, so
augur well, I don't think.
you think the two plausible reasons that come to mind are, one, the self-reinforcing mechanism within the Beltway, and secondly, a like mass hysteria.
Which
Those
has
are the only.
been promoted by I hate to say it sounds so conspiratorial, but the powers of darkness in Washington and London and other major cities, the international deep state, if you will, that you know, I've got to say, I've come to the conclusion that since the people that style themselves the elite hate the middle class because the middle class are independent and kind of taking up their space, the elite would much rather see just themselves, a small number, and a great mass of plebs, not middle class, but peasants within the modern context. They'd like to get rid of the middle class. And actually, they're acting to do so in many, many ways. So that's the way the world is going at the moment.
Hmm. So why? Well, obviously, everything that's been happening has been very destructive to the middle class and seems supports these elites, no doubt. But still, isn't it kind of an overreach to go after Russia this hard? I mean, that obviously can impact them wherever they live. I mean, if it goes to its furthest extent, I mean, there must be something in it that makes it worthwhile for them to pursue.
Yeah, it's all a matter of perverse psychology because these people have to realize that if things really go crazy, that Washington, D.C. will become a smoking hole in the ground. That's what's going to happen to it. And I don't care how deep the bunker underneath the White House is, there ain't going to be nothing left.
Hmm.
So what's going on with these crazy people? I don't know. But
Yeah, I'm not sure.
when you're dealing with crazy people, it's abnormal psychology. And even though they seem, I mean, they don't drool at the mouth, they're not wearing straitjackets,
Except
but
Biden.
that's right, except for Biden. And then, of course, the election is coming up in November. And this is really going to be a critical thing. I don't see how it can possibly be a normal election. It's going to be like the cherry on top of this whole cake that's being built, that election in November.
Hmm. And a couple of other things that came up that were interesting this week. That there was a visit to China by Putin, and whatever the West is doing is definitely pushing China and Russia closer together. I mean, closer than ever. I mean, these are two countries that have reason to mistrust each other, but I think the West has made it so that they become very reliable partners to one another. And so there's they issued a joint statement about a new era of partnership. They talked about their different priorities together, and they specifically addressed some grievances they have against the U.S. Violating the strategic balance, developing high precision non-nuclear weapons for potential decapitation strikes, extending the nuclear deterrence with allies, including Australia. Is it? I mean, they really are the West's actions. If mass psychosis, it doesn't seem that the China and Russia are suffering from the same psychosis, and maybe they have their own, but not the same one. And they're being pushed together, and you could just see these two belligerent parties forming, and getting in line for World War III.
It really is odd because, as we talked about these massive disasters that happened in China in relatively recent times or very recent times, that people forget that as late as 1980, it was a giant primitive country. And I do mean primitive. Uh, so the place is transformed radically. And people forget also, so that was 1980 under Deng Xiaoping when he said that it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice, which was code for what he said. We're changing from socialism to a more entrepreneurial free market type system. And of course, people say communist China. It's not communist. The Communist Party still exists, of course, but it's just a scam for the people that are members of it to stay on top. It's their local elite. And, it's funny, you look at Russia, which as recently as 1990 was the Soviet Union, and it's transformed totally again. It's not a communist country. There's more communists in American universities than there are in all Russia today. I don't think the average American understands that at all with either of these countries.
And I also don't think the average American understands the level of power that these two countries have together in opposition to the West, because not only in technology and manufacturing capacity and access to resources, that if the US decides to pick a fight with China and Russia together, especially, like it's hard to see that working out.
Especially since the US military is an empty box at this point. I was on a Zoom call the other day with several military guys that really know a lot about the hardware and the way the military works and so forth. And one of them was very concerned about the US Navy. He said, there's nothing there. You got the nuclear submarine fleet. Okay, that's fine. Strategic nuclear missiles to blow up cities, which incidentally, blowing up a city with H-bombs impresses me as intensely immoral. I mean, these are civilians
Exactly.
as opposed it's the armies that these are intended for. But he said the rest of the US Navy is basically nothing. You've got some frigates and destroyers that can launch missiles. And how much good has that done against the Houthis, which have gone toe to toe with them so far? So, no, if we get into a war, we're in big time trouble.
Yeah, it's concerning. A couple of the interesting things from last week is, there was the attempted assassination of the Slovakian prime minister. And we had the what looks like another attempt at a color revolution in Georgia. There was a coup plot that failed in the Congo, and then there was the president of Iran who died in a mysterious helicopter crash. So maybe these things all have nothing to do with each other, but it is interesting they're all happening at the same time.
Or they might. And maybe something will happen to Biden at this point, because the Democrats really want to be elected in November, or installed, even if they're not elected. But how can that possibly happen with Biden and Kamala, who are worldwide laughingstocks? So maybe something will happen to them the same way it's happened to these other people. Although the depth of protection offered by all kinds of US government agencies, including the Secret Service, is so thick, I don't see how anybody could get at Biden.
Yeah, I think he's gonna opt out before the election. I don't think he's gonna be. I don't think he'll end up being the guy on the ballot. Honestly,
I don't think so. And I will make bet the Democrats are going to win, but they've got to get rid of Biden and Kamala. How she ever? Well, she's
DEI.
when and she's black. Okay, I understand that, but you could have picked an intelligent, presentable black woman, for God's sake.
Could have, but they might not be as easy to control. I mean, Kamala probably doesn't even know what's happening around her.
And anyway, maybe they're setting things up for somebody who is intelligent and presentable and black, which is Michelle Obama. Maybe she's going to come out of the woodwork where she's been hiding, and she might be the next president.
Yeah, I know.
It's a chaotic situation, and chaos is by its very nature unpredictable. So anything can happen.
Yeah, and there's talk about making the Democratic convention, making it virtual. And if that happens, you can be certain that the reason that creates a framework by which they could easily put someone else up for as the candidate. And I think that's where it will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's virtual, who's going to testify as to what's actually happening? You're just watching a television show.
Right. We don't know if any of it's real at this point. Some of those deep fakes are getting pretty crazy. Sometimes, I mean, I saw an interview with a woman it was on NBC, I think, and they were watching a clip of Biden. They were asking this other reporter to give their opinion on whether or not they thought it was AI. And you watch this thing with Biden, and it looks like it's AI. And she goes, "Yeah, I think that one was." And so you go, no, that one was real. We know that was real because it came from. So the fact that they're even talking about this publicly on NBC and showing a clip of Biden and suggesting that it wasn't even him is amazing.
Well, there is a philosophical principle, and I believe it. A difference that makes no difference is no difference. So if you got somebody that passes, is it real or is it not? There used to be a commercial where they asked that question. It was a margarine commercial, and the margarine commercial was, "I can't believe it's not butter," because, well, of course, margarine's not butter. It's deadly
disgusting. Yeah.
No, it's a petroleum product that kind of looks like butter. But yeah, the whole world is turning into like margarine that looks like butter.
Yeah, and I guess Biden just stands up there and reads a teleprompter anyway. Doesn't really know where he is. So having a AI generated version that would do that would be, well,
It'd be
it's a new
better.
difference. Yeah.
Actually, it'd be better. Would instill confidence in the people. And of course, confidence is not a good thing to base a political system on, because confidence can blow away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane. You need reality, not confidence.
Yeah, you need confidence. No, you don't need confidence. So there's been some real military moves that have happened also. So we talked about the tactical nuke exercise from Russia, but also there's a whole host of European countries are expanding their military and training for civilians, and also just increasing their enrollment, I guess. And there's this interesting Polish effort that's happening this summer. The Polish Army says they launched a summer program called Vacation with the Army, where Polish men and women 18 to 35 can enroll in a 27-day basic training program at one of 70 bases. They earn about $1,500. And then after that, they're on the reserve list, so they'll be immediately called up if needed.
That sounds like fun. I mean, next summer they can be in the trenches against the Red Army.
Yeah, this year's vacation with the Polish Army. Next year it'll be vacation with the Russian Army.
Yeah. It's just amazing. It's I'm actually a bit loath to go back to the US during the northern summer, although I'd prefer to, because I'm a weather buff and I do like summer, but it's actually starting to get a little bit scary out there.
Yeah, and imagine being in Europe and seeing this stuff happen. I mean, one of the things that happened in Poland also is they decided to build a big barrier. I think they call it the Eastern Wall, or I can't remember what they call it, but basically build a border between them and Belarus. Supposedly to stop any invasion that may come that way. So they're investing in that, and then also they apprehended what they are saying is 9 Russian agents who were involved in basically trying sabotage and trying to cause some destruction within Poland. And they now have appointed a person to oversee sort of a program, a counterintelligence program, to look internally at any dissidents that might be supportive of Russia. And some general who's in counterintelligence is in charge of it, and they're going to appoint some other people, another 11 members to it. That basically it's setting up an apparatus for state security in Poland. And I would just be very concerned if I were in Poland. And I've been worried about it since this whole thing broke out. You could see it expanding, problems there, but this move is not good.
Well, I'm concerned enough about it being in the United States, where the FBI is keeping tabs on deplorables. I mean, as bad as the FBI was under J. Edgar Hoover, it's mutated into even a much more dangerous beast now.
It's true. Yeah, well, I'm not going back this summer, so that tells you how I feel about it.
No, and just some casual advice to our European listeners is that now would be an excellent time to liquidate all your shit in Europe and transfer it to South America, which, once again, for all the problems it might have, is going to be pretty much out of harm's way. So do it.
One of our file members is a German lady who has lived in Mexico for the last few years, and she was down visiting Buenos Aires last week, and she told me she was really impressed at how European the city was. And she plans to spend more time there, maybe buy some property. So Europeans, I think, are often surprised at how un-European Europe has become in comparison to a city like Buenos Aires.
Yeah, and Buenos Aires, although retail prices are moving up, no question about that at this point, but the prices of property are still dirt cheap. So if I was a European, I would dump my overpriced European property and move to Argentina. And the same is true of Canada, which has some of the most expensive property in the world. And that place is turning into a police state, maybe even faster than the US is. So I'd act now. It's, it's the old clock on the wall is 11 hours and 55 minutes at this point, approaching
Right.
midnight.
Right. If you wait until actual war is declared, it'll be too late. So pay attention to the signs, pay attention to the warfare that's actually happening around us right now that sets the ground for the real kinetic stuff that will likely be coming, and get out of harm's way if you can.
Yeah. And if you wait to, it takes a while to liquidate your assets, and they'll be trapped for sure. And you may be trapped physically because they put on these bans, which, well, of course, they did that during the COVID hysteria. They'll do it again.
They will. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's it for today. I will post the links to all this stuff on on our Substack. So if you want to check all those out, see all of the crazy things that have happened in a week, it's hard to believe so much. You can go to crisisinvesting.com and get that. And I guess we'll be back on Friday, Doug, with questions from viewers and from file members. So if you got questions, go to crisisinvesting.com, become a subscriber, and you can get priority questions answered there.
Yeah, people will probably have a few questions or comments that'll be of interest, I think.
They usually do. They usually do. Okay. All right, Doug. Well, thanks so much. I will talk to you on Friday.
Thanks, Matt.